What's up, Internet? You're tuning in episode 124 of Nintendo Noise, Slipscreen Games' weekly Nintendo podcast. I'm your host, Pete and Bessie, joined as always by my very good friend and co-host, Mr. Steven Radford.
Hello, hello.
Hello, Steven. So we have an interesting episode this week because we're not quite talking about Pokemon, but we're also not talking about Pokemon.
hmm I mean, it's a strange one, right? Because there is some potential Pokemon here, and there has been some like DMCA's already issued and stuff. But it's the big game at the moment. We'd be remiss not to talk about it, I think.
Yeah, so this week is an interesting one on Nintendo Noise because we're going to be talking about a little bit about Palworld, right? Which is I think safe to say the game of the moment right now, the first big game of 2024. And if you are not familiar with it by name, I think you'll probably remember its reveal, right? I think it's been very much talked about as like the game that looks like Pokemon with guns, right?
Yeah.
And it was revealed. I don't even remember what event it was. It might have been an Xbox
Summer
event.
Game Fest. It was
Summer
at
Game
Summer
Fest.
Game
Okay,
Fest.
that
Yeah.
was it. And it's made by a Japanese studio called Pocket Pair, a pretty small studio, only a couple of games under their belt. And the game is, taking the world by storm right now, right? I mean, obviously, the being a kind of edgier Pokemon knockoff with guns is kind of the thing that initially it was getting headlines for, right? And I think some of the character designs being very, very similar to Pokemon designs or designs from other, creature type, animes
They're
and
pretty
manga.
Even that first reveal trailer, you see like it like opens with what looks like an Eevee and a Gyarados, and it's like, okay,
Right.
it's kind of
And
on the nose.
And then obviously, right, there's the mechanic of you weaken them and then you capture them in a ball and then you can call them to help you out later on, right? So I think the similarities between the two are not subtle, right? But that's, you know, uh only part of the story, right? Because I think the thing that a lot of people are, I think, maybe getting lost in the shuffle at times, right, is that, aside from those visual differences, right, gameplay wise, the differences are very significant, right? It's a survival crafting game similar to like Ark or Rust and aside from that mechanic of
It's also very similar to Ark. I've seen screenshots, like, comparing the menus
totally,
and things that, are
totally.
pretty damn similar.
Yeah, absolutely. And and I think the conversation has gotten interesting because when it comes to influence, right? Like there's certainly nothing wrong with that, right? There are dozens and like we wouldn't have the video game industry if you weren't allowed to iterate and learn from your competitors and try your own spin on what other people are doing. But the conversation has gotten messier as allegations of plagiarism, which kind of initially just started as fans pointing out similarities and screenshots, as kind of continued to escalate over these last couple days, and it's led to a lot of questions, I think, from people trying to understand where the truth of the story is, right, and where where things really lie. Is this a game that you should feel uncomfortable supporting because it's stealing assets and it's relying on AI and it's doing this and that. And I think it's a thing that I've seen people in our community talk about. I've seen a lot of talk about it on the internet. So even though it's not a Nintendo game, since so much of the conversation is so focused on its relation to Nintendo and how Nintendo and the Pokemon Company may or may not react to it, I think you put it right. We'd be remiss to not chat about it today, and I think it'll be illuminating for you and I and the listeners, I think, to walk through some of this stuff and separate the fact from fiction and, try to move forward with a little more knowledge for all of us as we
Yeah, I
engage
mean,
with this Power World.
there's been a kind of a lot of, people saying things without any evidence, right, over the last few days,
A lot of
and
viral
then
tweets.
they're kind of backpedaling on it as more and more kind of comes to light, which I just think is never good. Once the message gets out there that this thing is fact and has happened, it's already escalated and has become viral. I know some people don't care, even if that fact did turn out to be true. But other people do care, and it does tarnish what may be a game that was made completely of their own accord and with no kind of input from other than inspiration, heavy inspiration from character designs.
Which is, I don't think a problem, right? Like having heavy inspiration, right, is something that I think de- we're gonna get
I
into
mean,
the minutia
I
of it
look at it
later,
as
right?
like,
But
remember when we saw, it was when Breath of the Wild came out, right? And then we
Mhm.
had all of those games that looked like it. There was one from Ubisoft, but it played completely different. And there's the mobile game. What's that called that everyone plays? It's
Immortals
like
is the
super.
Ubisoft game, and then it's
Mhm.
the Honkai Star Rail team, right? But it's
Yeah.
I can't think of the name of the game.
Everyone's screaming right
Yeah,
now.
I know we should really remember the name of this game, but
Yeah.
I can't remember it.
Genshin Impact. Then
Genshin,
Genshin
thank
Impact
you.
came out, right? And it looked very much like, oh, they've taken the Breath of the Wild world, but it played completely different. It was their own assets in there.
Sure,
They'd
sure.
put the hard work in,
Well, I mean, I
and the
think
game has gone on to from strength to strength.
I think one of the best examples of something like that is like Stardew Valley, right? Where it's like there are plenty of games that are, outright like and wear that influence on their sleeve, right? Of like this is the type of game we were inspired by. Last year we had Pizza Tower, right? Inspired by WarioWare. So like there's a not WarioWare, WarioLand. There's a cool way to do that, right? There's a way where that doesn't rub anybody the wrong way. I think the reason that this is coming under fire is there's this question of, you know, where is the line between inspiration and plagiarism? When are you no longer inspired by somebody else's work and you're taking from it and building on top of it to, you know, take advantage of the
Mhm.
fact that there's already an established art style that you can ape, right? Versus developing your own or something like that,
I
right?
do think I do think copying an art style's fine. Like if you want an art style that looks cartoony and like fits with the world, then fine. Look at something like Fortnite, for example. That has the similar, I would say, like cartoony art style. That's kind of what I feel like the world of this should look like. Or the world of Palworld should probably take on more of the Fortnite style than the realistic style that it seems to have with like at cartoon characters plopped in there.
I mean, that's the
But
thing though, right? Is
it's the
like,
it's the core designs of the characters that's the
right.
problem here. Is
Yeah.
it the same as looking at, say, someone's article and jumbling around a few words and putting something, a couple of extra flourishes in here and there, and then saying, "This is mine," and passing it off as you're saying? Because you couldn't get away with that at, like, college or something, right? You couldn't go to Wikipedia and copy and paste and rearrange things and pass it off as your own work because it's fundamentally someone else's work that you're kinda copying there.
And I think that's kind of the question is like, where is the line for that when it comes to art? And I think that it gets really muddled when you're talking about digital assets and the ability to like take the foundation of something and then tweak it to the point where it's legally distinct rather than, something like maybe Cuphead, right? Which is like that has an art style that is aping and inspired by an existing art style, but then it built on top of it and it developed original characters and an original world and, something that has its own sense of identity. And, I think there are probably lots of folks that would argue that that is the case with Palworld, right? And then that's why it's resonating with people. But we'll get into some of the nitty gritty because I think when you look at some of what's been uncovered, it gets less speculative and less, oh, is this, is this that? And it's more like, let's look at what we have here and try to suss out where you think the truth lies, right?
Mhm.
So let's give some more context for folks who might need it, right? So the game, just entered early access this past week, and it's already become a massive success. In just 5 days, the game has sold 7 million copies on Steam. That's not even taking into account its release on Game Pass, right? And the number of people that have been playing over there. But Jeff Keighley pointed out on Twitter that translates to approximately $189 million American in those 5 days, which is huge for a small independent studio of only a few people. In the last 24 hours, its peak concurrent player count hit 1.8, over 1.8 million, and making that the second.
They hit 2,000,000
Oh,
later
they
on
hit
in the
2
day.
million. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
they've hit 2,000,000 now,
I put
yeah.
this document together a few hours ago, so that must be new news.
Yeah.
So they crossed 2 million today. Does that make it number one, or because it was it? Oh gosh. Oh, we lost Steve. Is he back? Hello?
I'm back. Hello.
Okay, there he is. Okay, so is that now the number one spot or
No, 3.8 million was the
okay,
number one, which was PUBG before it went free to play because it used to be a kind of a paid game, but
right.
that's no longer on the chart because it's now free to play, so it doesn't rank on there.
So yeah, so it's number 2 above Counter-Strike 2 and behind PUBG now.
Mhm.
So that's obviously speaks to how successful the game has been, that it's resonating with people, that people are playing it a lot, and that it clearly has, something going for it, that even amid all these accusations, it doesn't seem to be dissuading most players from getting involved and checking it out. And I've seen a lot of those players, you know, um, very very fervently defending the game and talking about how much they like it and why they're so inspired to play. And that it has its own sense of identity and that it isn't just a ripoff, right? So, um, there that I think there's some truth to that, right? I think when you're talking about from a gameplay perspective, right? Like it definitely does a lot of things that are very different and not at all a rip off of Pokemon, and I can totally see why
You mean I can't get my army of Pokemon to, like, farm for me, and I can't,
to
like, torture
practice
them?
slave labor.
Like,
Yeah.
I
Uh
I wouldn't I'd have thought that that would have been right in Nintendo's wheelhouse, and we could publish that straight away.
And it's interesting because I've seen some people argue that the game is actually parody, and that part of the reason that the designs are so similar is to poke fun at those things
No,
and have these
no.
mechanics that they wouldn't have in a yeah, it's people like to
I
defend their
mean,
favorites.
art's open to interpretation, but there's no way I see
Absolutely.
this as and there's no way I see this as a parody. This is, a commercial product to make money, and these characters make the money.
That doesn't mean that it can't be parody.
Yeah, I don't think it is parody. I think it's a really savvy game design that we took elements from lots of games that lots of people like. Ark has been
Yep.
a number one seller on Steam. Pokemon's obviously been a phenomenon. Merge the 2 together, and you end up with kinda something that people seem to think is pretty special.
Easy elevator
And,
pitch, right?
yeah, it's Ark with Pokemon. It's instead of
Pokemon with
dinosaurs.
guns. It
Yeah.
markets itself, right? For sure. So I am now going to pull from a couple of articles from Andy Robinson over on Video Games Chronicle, who has been covering the plagiarism story over there, and that's where I've been getting my updates. So all credit to Andy Robinson on this one. We'll have a link down in his reporting below. Uh, the game started like the whole wave of these accusations started on social media, right? You had a number of different users, some of which who are players, some of whom are game developers, who are creating threads on Twitter and some other social platforms, mostly on Twitter, and highlighting what they saw as evidence of the plagiarism that was taking place, right? And we'll link to some of this down below so you can check it out for yourself. Um, I will show some of these for the folks on YouTube, and you can kind of see for yourself the similarity between some of these designs, and I make that decision for yourself, I suppose. But I think when you look at some of them, it's definitely you can very much see the inspiration, we'll call it, right, for now.
Mhm.
Um, and it's not subtle, right? Like the example I have right now, this is the one that if you clicked on our our YouTube video, you'll have seen this one in the thumbnail, right? Um, where there's a pal that has the exact same face as the Palladian Meowth, right? And there's a lot of examples like this of, you know, some of which are like one to one, where it's this Pokemon looks exactly like this other Pokemon, or I'm sorry, this pal looks exactly like this other Pokemon, or there are some where there's like kind of elements of multiple characters combined. I have an example up on screen right now that folks have highlighted that is a Pokemon or a pal that looks like it has Sobble's head fin and then like Slowpoke's face and then like the body of Claude Sire. So it's like
Mhm.
you kind of have a lot of these different designs where some of them look like a one-to-one, like this is a ripoff of this Pokemon, versus some of them seem to have maybe tried to be a little bit more clever with it and kind of brought multiple designs together. But you can very much see where, when people are making those kinds of comparisons, it's pretty obvious, right? Like what and you made the point, right? From that first trailer. You were like, yeah, this one's Gyarados. This one's, it's
Yeah,
okay.
you can see it. Like there's no getting away from it. But it's if I put Mickey Mouse's eyes and mouth on my own character, can Disney come and sue me because I've taken his eyes and
I
mouth?
think it depends, right?
I don't know if they can.
Is the thing, right? Is like it really depends because, famously, well, I guess this I don't know. I don't know how much people know this. But if you've ever read Console Wars by Blake Harris, there's an anecdote about the creation of Sonic and the Japanese artist who drew the original design before it was redesigned by Sega of America, said that he combined Felix the cat and like I it might have been Mickey Mouse, but I forget some other like
Mm.
classic cartoon character, and it was like, yeah, that's how I came up with it. I just put these two designs together, and like that was it. And that's the thing, though, right? Is like using something like that as a jumping off point and then iterating is, you know, that is
I mean,
one thing. I think it's a
but
little bit
that's like exactly how Mickey Mouse existed in the first place. He was Oswald the Lucky Rabbit became Mickey Mouse when Disney realized he
sure.
didn't own the copyright to
Yeah, but
Oswald,
that's
and it
that's
was owned
also
by a different
like
studio.
that's also like the same artist though, right? Like you iterate like being like I drew another character in my own style is different than me being like, okay,
Mhm.
I'm an aspiring artist and I'm going to just ape this other person's style and try to make that my own. It's like I I, I think the thing that we're running into here, right, is that there is a legal argument for what is okay, and then there's an ethical argument. And I think that there are a lot of people who think uh that this is like you're biting someone else's style, right? Like it's like it doesn't matter if it's legally distinct or whatever. It's not genuinely artistic to just rip off somebody else's stuff and pass it off as your own, right? Like it's like it's like dishonorable, right? Like
Yeah, maybe you're right. But playing devil's advocate, right? How many of the people that now work there at Game Freak, were there for the original bunch of Pokemon? Yeah, we know the team working on Plucky, whatever it's called, Plucky
Lucky Squire.
Squire. He was like he was the game director and art director at Pokemon, but he was only there for a short tenure. And I would imagine he had to kind of fit the Pokemon to the art style that was
House
already
style. Yeah.
defined? It's like there is some kind of that adaptation of, well, this is not technically my style, this isn't how I would do it, but I'm kind of fitting it to it. In the same way that, animators at Disney or Pixar are doing a similar thing. It's like, well, this is the character, this is what it looks like. Same with Simpsons, right? I know you're a big Simpsons guy, and like that's kind of what they did. They have this like definition of Bart should always look like this and Homer should always look like this, and they kind of
Yeah,
fit that style.
and I guess that's a thing I've seen a lot of people talk about where it's like, "Oh no, like they ripped off the multi-million-dollar company, like boo-hoo," and I think that there's an argument to be made there too, I guess, right? Where like, you know, uh why is it okay for a corporation to own an art style? And like, yeah,
Well, do you remember when Sony tried copyrighting the way or trademarking the way they did Into the Spider Verse, and the artists were like,
yeah,
"Hang on a second, we came up with that idea and concept that was ours, and like we figured out how to do it, and now the company Sony
sure.
owns that and can copyright that. How's
Right.
that fair?"
And eh, and it's like it's not an easy answer, right? Like it's like I think it's one of those things where both can be wrong in a way, right? Where it's like I
Mhm.
don't know that it's more morally correct, but like there's an argument to be made, right? That it's like when, you know, Masuda and, I don't need to rattle off. I'm about to just rattle off a bunch of Pokemon. When the original Pokemon team, right, came together and created Pokemon and made the Pokemon company and set it off on the, path that it went on, right? Like some of those people might not be there anymore, some of them might be or whatever, but like they made that in the name of that company and like that's their creation and they handed it off to other people, right? And it's, there's an argument to be made that like that's how IP stewardship works, right? And it's like you don't necessarily have to agree with that, right? To see that there's, something different, I think, about being a part of a established creative legacy like that, like coming into because that's like the same thing if you are the next person to like write the next Spider-Man comic or something like that, right? Like that's not a character you created. You're coming into
Mhm.
an existing canon and this world that, was created decades and decades ago, but part of the tradition is handing it off to new creators and adding to that tapestry. And it's you could argue that's the same thing with Pokemon, right? Where it's like, yeah, like new people are coming in and adding to it, but it's done under the creative stewardship of the organization that was founded by the original creators, and ideally is maintaining that ethos. It's like the same thing with like the Jim Henson Company and the Muppets, right? Where it's like he's
Mhm.
been long dead, but there are people who are his creative partners and his
His
children and
grandkids, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
right, like who have been there trying to maintain his legacy and maintain the spirit and the quality of the work that he created, right? And I don't think that it's right to say that like some corporation that the Disney company bought the rights to the Muppets, so they deserve to be the only people that get to make that kind of art or whatever, right? Like I'm not certainly not advocating for that, but I think
Yeah, I mean, like, I would never want that. We would never got the musical Avenue Q, which I think is wonderful,
but that's
and
parody. That is
yeah,
parody,
that
and
is
parody
parody,
is
yeah.
legally protected. And it would be different if I was just like, you know what? I want to just make a new. I'm gonna make a puppet variety show,
Yeah.
and the main character is Flurmit the Toad, right? Like it's like that is fucking different, right? Like it is, and that's like you know, it,
But is it illegal? That's the
no, but
question,
it's
right?
like
That's what
it's
we're
like the
getting here.
creative
It's like it
equivalent of like the Oreo Hydrox thing though, right? Where it's like,
yeah.
yeah, it's not illegal, but like I think it's not cool when it comes to art to do that. It's not and it's like you
But
don't
what
have
if it
to
is like the Oreo Hydrox and the clone, the ripoff, is better than
is
the
better,
original,
right?
and everyone kind of
Like
goes to
Fortnite?
that one instead?
Like, that's what happened with Fortnite, right? And it's like, I mean, here's the thing though, right? I think you can take it back to this whole corporatization argument that you and I are having. Is it cool that Epic, the multi-million dollar company, came in and took PUBG's Steam and basically was like, well, we have more money and resources than you, and you can't keep up with us, so we're gonna make a
And
better
then but
version
then
of
they
your
did the
game now.
exact same thing with Among Us, which
Yep,
pissed everyone off even more. It was
exactly.
like, "Oh, you're gonna steal their map?" And it's like, "This is a small team." I
Right.
kind of feel like that the other way feels worse to me. It's like a
It
big
does. It
corporation,
does.
multi-billion dollars, a part owned by Tencent against like a small team of like 10 people, right? Or
And I
whatever it
think
is.
that's where people come at it with this argument of like, oh no, like like you're. It's like when people joke about people like defending billionaires on like
Mhm.
you're jumping in front of the bullet aimed at Elon Musk meme, right? Like it's like, yeah, fair enough, right? Like I think that there's something there, but also I think that's where the artistic integrity of it comes in, where it's like, yeah, I don't care that this is like making money or like potentially like taking business away from it. Like, that's not the argument that I think a lot of people are making. It's more like, what you should not be supporting this game that is using AI tools to take someone else's work and alter it
Potentially
slightly,
using AI tools. We
right?
don't know that.
We don't know that.
Um,
I'm saying though, but like that is, I think, more the argument of like that's also not cool. And it doesn't matter that you're a small team of inexperienced developers. Like you shouldn't steal other people's work and pass it off on your own to make $180 million. Like, and I think
mhm.
there, I think there's I can see both sides of that debate. But let's
Me too, and that's why the discourse has been absolutely horrific
it's been
online about this
toxic as
game.
hell. Yeah.
Yeah.
I won't be
But
surprised if
I
we get
think where
this some hate for talking
where
about it.
do you land on it? Because I think for me, I don't know that there's anything illegal been happening here. I don't know that they've stolen assets and taken the 3D models. I think maybe there's an argument to be made that that could have happened, but
Well,
they could have
let's
also just looked at them and decided and kind of recreated them themselves in the same way that Ubisoft did when they got the Mario characters and they took that and they did the Mario Rabbids presentation. They took it and they showed it to Miyamoto, and Miyamoto asked, "How did you get these characters?" And it's like, "Well, we made them. Like, we looked at Mario, we figured out how he kind of works, and we pieced him together ourselves. And like, this is what we did as talented artists." And I think Palworld's team probably could have done a similar thing there. I think morally, when this game was even announced, I was like, "How's that even fly? Like, how is this even possible that this game can be released? Like, this is clearly Pokemon." And
so
like,
I think where can't come down on it is evolving because there is so I want to move along to some of the other evidence that's been supplied here before I offer my personal opinion.
mhm,
Because I think I'll say this: I'm with you if there's no evidence of plagiarism, right? Like if the only thing that this team is guilty of is making original characters that are heavily ripped off of other characters. I don't think that's inherently a good or bad thing. I think that when you are taking other characters and repurposing them, like the intent matters a lot. Because I think of like a seminal work like Watchmen is a great example of like every character in the Watchmen is a pastiche or a ripoff of an existing comic book character, right? But it was done to tell a story, right? And to say something. And I the jury's still out for me on that, I guess, because I think that there is like from what I've played of the game so far, which is not that much. Uh Friend of the show, Snackago on YouTube, who has a new video out about Final Fantasy 16, which you should go check out. Bought me a copy of the game so that I could talk about it for everybody because I didn't really have much interest in the game on its face because the survival crafting genre is not really my thing. But from what I've played, right, like I think that the game has original ideas and things that are and systems that are well executed and that I can compare to some of these other games that I've played in the genre. And, you know, I get why people are playing it and having fun with it, right? Like I think that it has something there, right? So if all it's guilty of is like, taking very heavy influence from a popular thing because they wanted to inject that personality into a different genre and do something different and subversive and a little dark. Like, I think that that's cool. Like, that is creative. And there's an argument that what they're doing there is transformative and is, yeah, even if they are inspired by Pokemon, that's okay. So is Casepi, so is Monster Crown, so is Moonstone Island, and why is that okay and this isn't, right? I think where that comes into question is with these 3D models and what is the origin of some of these creations. And I think some of the conversations that have happened, in the week since have put that into question for me a little bit. So I'll say some of the circumstantial evidence that people put out, right, was that the the company does have a history with AI, right? They have their last game was called, or I believe it was their last game. It was one of their previous games. Is called AI Art Imposter. This was shared by an artist named Zatri over on Twitter, who was like showing how there's an AI art generator as a mechanic in the game, right? It's like it's one of the things that you do in the game. Um,
which, by the way, love this as a concept for a game. It reminds me of the red character in Animal Crossing coming and bringing me fake art all the time, except a human has just modified those pieces of art to move the pearl earring to a different side or
yeah,
change
that's
it
the
to a
thing though
different
is
color.
I don't think they actually did. I think they're coming under fire because it's like it is actually just using a generative AI tool, and it's not something that was actually handcrafted by a developer. Um, that's or by artists, right? Like it's not like they created original works to uh actually
Feed the
use that.
generator. Yeah.
Yeah, right, exactly, to actually, like, have that mechanic play out, and I think maybe that's an example again of what I'm talking about with Palworld is, like, is this a studio that has good ideas but isn't investing in art assets and in original creation because they wanna take advantage of AI to save money? And the CEO of Pocket Pair, Takuro Mizobi is how I believe you say his name. Uh, there are a couple of historical Twitter posts that that same artist had highlighted as part of her kind of evidence for why it seems as though they're using AI to get this work done, right? Um, and again, the artist in question, Zayshree, was very clear to say this is not evidence of this. I'm not saying this. I'm not saying this proves anything. I'm saying that it's pretty suspect that a team that only has a small number of inexperienced artists got this many original character designs done without using AI, and especially when you have these historical tweets from their CEO talking about how interested he is in AI, how it could be used, it could be sophisticated enough to avoid copyright issues. And he literally had a tweet where he showed how AI could make original Pokemon designs that would be legally distinct. So, and again, that's not proof of anything, but it does paint a certain kind of picture, right? That I think has led to the narrative that we find ourselves in now. And I'm going to show you the
Mhm.
example right now for the folks on YouTube of these are the fake Emon that he posted, and he posted them alongside the Pokemon he used as like bases, I think, to try and like get original designs. And it's like that does feel pretty damning in the context of what you're talking about, right? So I could see why somebody looks at that and goes, "Oh yeah, like this is proof," right? And it's not, but
It's definitely not, and, like, even, like, the generation here, right? None of these characters look any good. Like you see the ones that are generated, they got goofy faces. They look like they've been generated by
yes,
AI. They don't look like actual characters that would work. You'd have to look at these as an artist, even if this was your base point, and go, "What do we do with this mess? Like, what do we do with this
sure, sure.
jumbled mess to turn it into a thing?" And I know so many fucking people are using ChatGPT to like do all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, but like you
ChatGPT
shouldn't be.
has my book in it, which was stolen without my permission.
That's the
And
point, though. Like that's bad. That's immoral. That
it's
is
really
other
bad,
people
but people
taking
used
your
it.
work and using it as their
Yeah,
own, and it's
I
not.
know. I know it, and it's totally not okay. But I've used ChatGPT and I've benefited from it. And it's the company that made those tools that needs to be held accountable, and not the people that
I don't
use the
agree.
tools, in
No, I
my
don't agree
opinion.
at all. I don't agree at all. Yes, the company needs to be held accountable, but if you're using the tool and then passing it off as original work, you are plagiarizing other people's work, and that's all there is to it. Like that's what it is. It's that content doesn't exist without other people's work. And it's one thing if you're using it to help you with an outline or to help you to spell check or
Mhm,
whatever. There are applications of AI for writing or whatever that are not unethical, right? Like, and I think that that's a conversation that we are going to need to have, right? Because there was the interview with Sony's CEO that we talked about on Flip Screen this week, where he mentioned AI. I think in that interview about how I'm not looking to replace people with AI, but I think that there will probably come a point where game developers use AI generation as a tool in the same way that we have randomly generated tile sets in
we've already
roguelikes and
seen
stuff.
it.
That's
We've already
AI.
saw that in that game. What was it called? A couple of years ago by the Rick and Morty dude, that they used
Yes.
generative
Yeah.
AI to make, like, background art in that
Right.
game.
And like, but again, I think that that's a way different thing than you used it to write copy or you used it to create quote unquote a piece of art. That's not really the same thing. And I think that is a conversation that is going to be more nuanced as we get further in it. But right now,
Mhm.
like people's are really sensitive about it because it's an ongoing issue and it's a thing where like, every popular example of an AI tool, right, is like has been found to be guilty of plagiarism, right? There are currently lawsuits going on with DeviantArt and Midjourney over them stealing assets from people. And,
Mhm.
that's like that is a way different thing than what you're talking about, right? And like I do think even if you're like, okay, you know, I took something and got it generated and then I went and made some adjustments or whatever. It's like, I mean, you're still stealing from other people's work and not crediting it. And that is sketchy. Like that is a sketchy way to go about things, whether or not it's legally acceptable, and I,
I mean, I think that would be legally acceptable because I generated a picture, I looked at the picture, and then I took that picture and I used my brain to do something else with it. I think
yeah,
that's the same thing that we're talking about with them looking at the Pokemon and piecing maybe 3 or 4 of them together
but
and
that's
constructing their own.
right. But this is the thing, Steve, is there's a wrinkle in this that it goes further and it's more sinister. And I'm with you on that, right? So here's one last piece of context that I want to provide before we get into that, right? Is uh in a blog post that was published by their CEO, right? He said that Palworld's 100 character concepts were mostly made by a single person, a single grad student, right? Who is a recent graduate and new to the industry.
Mhm.
That's suspect. That is suspect when you think about the context of how many things were created and that you have these examples of things looking like other people's work. So, just want to give you that. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty.
Do we know do
So,
we so that's concept art, right? I guess it's not, it's that's 100 potential drawings.
right.
It's not 100 3D models that one person
No.
made, right?
Well, theoretically, that's what we don't know, right? So now here's the thing though. I want you to there's a link down here I'm going to need you to click on. I've got it highlighted for you in our document here, Steve. Uh
Okay.
on on Sunday, there was a anonymous account that dropped has basically been established on Twitter specifically to post about this. And the user goes by the name Bio, and they have been posting a number of different videos and screenshots and things that they claim show evidence not just of inspiration from design, but of plagiarism of actual assets, of taking assets and modifying them to create quote unquote original assets, right? In a way that would be plagiarism. Uh, so there are, and again, I will share a link to these so that everybody can kind of check it out because there's just a ton of different ones, and you're definitely going to want to, I think, dig through them if you want to like see it for
Mhm.
yourself and be able to kind of make your own opinions on it. But I am going to show some context for the folks on YouTube so they can kind of see it for themselves. But there is, you know, none of the models that are shown are like a one-to-one copy, but their claim is they believe that what has happened is that the Palworld team has taken models from the Switch
Scarlet and
games,
Violet.
Scarlet and Violet, and dumped them, and then edited those models to create the pals that they've used. So VGC, again, right? Andy Robinson's reporting on this one, reached out to two different AAA game artists who spoke with them anonymously and provided these quotes on what they thought was going on here. So the first artist said, "You cannot in any way accidentally get the same proportions on multiple models from another game without ripping the models, or at the very least, tracing them meticulously first. I would stand in court to testify as an expert on this. To give you an idea of how impossible this is, sometimes we have to copy one mesh to another when we're making sequels to games. For example, redrawing an NPC from one game to another, and even when we rework those old models, they only sometimes, all caps, match this closely due to rigging changes that might need to happen. There have been times when dozens of artists are given the same concept art to create a 3D model, for example, during art tests for jobs. I've seen 30 artists try to make the same horse using the exact same schematics. I'm sorry, using the same horse using the exact schematics. Excuse me. Just want to make sure I'm using the proper quote there. None were as close to each other as these Palworld models are to the Pokemon models. None. The silhouettes and proportions here are near perfect matches. Then another senior character artist who they spoke to said they agreed that these model comparisons could be compelling evidence of plagiarism. And then this is their direct quote. The wireframe meshes look different, so they're not the same models, but it's so close that they may have built over the top of the Pokemon models and made a few changes so they weren't exactly the same. So when does quote unquote heavily inspired become a blatant copy? It's much easier to
Hmm.
take a successful style and tweak it slightly than it is to come up with a new cohesive style, right? I wouldn't be comfortable passing this off as my work. It's just too close in too many places or in many places. And that was the quote I paraphrased earlier. So to me, right? Like when you start looking at these model comparisons, and I hear from two people that are experts in the field, right, saying that them being this close is not an accident, right? Like that, that's where I get, that gives me real pause, right? Because I am not a game developer. I am not an artist. I can't speak to, looking at something in game and saying how close it is to this other model and whether or not that counts. And it gets too much into that vibes territory that you and I are talking about, where I don't feel comfortable commenting on something without evidence to say this is plagiarism, this is that, versus where's the line when it comes to inspiration. But when I
Hmm.
have quotes here from two senior artists saying that it's highly unlikely that something would be this close without it being a deliberate effort to copy something. That that rings a little bit different, and I think that to me doesn't, that's where this bucks some of these other examples you and I have been circling back to of being like, why is this okay? Why is Power World not okay if this game, this game, this game, this game are okay? To me, it's that. Like that is not the same thing as being inspired by. That is taking someone else's work and changing. It's like it's the same thing as you like taking your buddy's assignment and changing a couple words and then handing it in as your own essay, right? And it's like,
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Which is what I was saying at the top, right? Is that I can't go on Wikipedia, copy and paste it, change a few things around, and go here you go because it's not going to fly. I I agree with you. I do think there is compelling evidence here. I do also think that it's down to Nintendo and the Pokemon Company and a court to really enforce it,
yeah. I mean, and if
and
they
not
care.
not the court of public opinion because they clearly don't care. They've clearly been buying this game in droves, and they're clearly having a good enough time with it.
So what do you so to take it back, I guess, to where you stand on it, let's talk about that before we talk about the implications, I guess, of it legally. Like, what do you
Mm.
make of this? Do you think that this is, do you look at this as being plagiarism? Do you think this is like on the wrong side of ethics here? Or is
I
this
thought it
like
was on the wrong side of I thought it was on the wrong side of ethics before plagiarism was even involved. It was way too close for comfort. Like when I saw that initial reveal trailer, I thought, "Come on, this is nonsense. Like, there's no way this can really fly." Like, but when you add in potentially stolen assets, I think the AI thing is just a non-story. I don't believe that that was used. If there's to be anything fishy going on here, I think it's a copy and paste of assets from Scarlet and Violet, and they've modified it and done things over the top. That seems more likely to me than generative AI being used here because those designs look like shit. Let's be real. Like they did not look good. The things that he was posting on Twitter. Um, and I don't know. I mean, it's everyone's personal choice as to where they fall on it. In the same way that it's personal choice as to whether you would use something like a generative AI tool in the first place. Personally, I have no intention of playing this game, but I never did.
yeah, I mean, that's my thing, right? Like it's like if I didn't have podcasts where people were gonna ask me my opinion about it, I wouldn't have gone out of my way to play it because I think it does kind of feel like a, you know, it does to me have a bit of that stink of like it feels kind of just like disposable, right? Like, it's like it doesn't
Mhm.
it is kinda just like a couple other things mashed together and, like, let's see if this is a thing. But I recognize that I am not the best judge of it because it's not my genre, right? So, I'm trying to go into it with an open mind as somebody who is a fan of that genre, like, how do the systems hold up? Like, what is the moment to moment gameplay like? And, my experience with it overall so far has definitely not been negative. I don't think it's like a poorly made or poorly optimized game. But yeah, I don't know. I got to play more of it, I think, before I can really weigh in on like whether or not I think it has enough of its own identity for this to, be a moot point. But I think when you get into the assets and everything, right, is where I'm right there with you, where it's like, any amount of that is totally unethical in my book. And it doesn't
Mhm.
matter if you're stealing from Fortnite or whatever, you're still stealing somebody else's work and passing it off as your own. And that's just not cool. It's just it's not earnest as an artist to do that and pass that off and say that this is my work is like
But that's also not legal, right? That you cannot just copy an asset, paste it into another game, and that's okay. That
right.
is where that is where I think the Pokemon Company probably would have some leg to stand on in
Yeah,
court. If it was just a case of, well, the designs look similar.
that's nothing.
I mean, I don't think it is not nothing. Like if I made
It's hard to
a
prove.
yeah, if I made a movie that looked very similar to Mickey Mouse and had like a lot of his same traits and like it was, but it just happened to be a different genre of film instead, I think Disney would still be coming for me, especially if it made $189 million in a weekend.
I think
They're probably going to want a slice of that pie.
that's gonna be the interesting thing is, like, are they motivated to take action because of how much money this thing has made, which I think is potentially the case. But let's talk about that in a minute. I wanna talk about, some of the legal side of things
Mm.
in a second here. But before we do that, let me remind you that this episode of Nintendo Noise is brought to you by our Patreon producers for the month of January. Oh my God, my chair is sinking. They are, of course, Arnold J. Rimmer, Christopher Valens, Earth Visitor, Gabriel Hasselmeyer, aka Sobi, Snackago, Steve Stompy, Susan Loves Cats, and also Boobies, Ty the Dude, and Wakahula. Thank you all so much for your support over on patreon.com/flipscreengames. Y'all are the realest of the real, and we greatly appreciate your support of this and all of our sister shows. Remember, if you want to show your support just like they did, you can head over to patreon.com/flipscreengames and get a bunch of perks and goodies, including early access to the show. But if you don't have any money for us, you can head over to flipscreen.games. That's our website where you can find all the ways that you can get involved all over the web, including checking out our sister shows, which I'll say this, if you're enjoying the Palworld conversation and you want to hear more of my in-depth thoughts about the game, you're going to want to tune into this week's episode of the Steam Deck podcast. We'll be recording that in just a couple days, and I'll have had a chance to get a couple more hours into the game and share some more in-depth thoughts, as well as how it performs on the Steam Deck. So if you want to hear my thoughts about that, if you are playing the game, you want to write in with some questions, or if you're thinking about picking up the game and you have some questions that you want answered, make sure you write into the show in all the ways that we just said that you can do above, and you can find all those over at flipscreen.games. Well, let's get back to the show. So let's talk about this legal angle here and like what happens now,
I mean,
right?
bear in mind, neither of us are copyright lawyers. But
No,
yeah.
but thankfully, the fine folks at VGC and Rock Paper Shotgun both talked to some copyright lawyers, so I could read what they said. And that's great. I'll share their thoughts because they went to law school, so they'll.
I'm curious as to like what's copyright law in Japan like though, because like surely that's where this would have to be tried. It's a Japanese company stealing from a Japanese company.
International copyright law does exist, and I know that it's different than it is in the states, but so I'm not sure how that works. And I because Nintendo and Pokemon are international brands and international companies that like operate in every sector of the world, I wonder how that plays into it. But that's a good point. Um, but we have a quote here from David Hansel, who is a intellectual property lawyer and a digital intellectual property and digital media lawyer, excuse me, at Hansel Henson. So he's a partner there. So he's a head honcho over there. He told VGC that if it could be proven that elements of the 3D models were the same, then that would represent a quote unquote smoking gun for any legal case brought forward by the Pokemon company. Quote, it's down to Nintendo to absolutely prove copying, not merely taking influence. It's got to be obvious copying. You look at one picture and you look at the other alongside it. The industry would have come to an end years ago if you weren't allowed to take influence. You can't have a monopoly on a certain style of artwork. It literally has to be copying, right? Which is exactly what we said. So I think actually maybe you and I are copyright lawyers and we know exactly what we're talking about, Steve.
Yeah,
You are.
David, hit me up for a job. My starting
Yeah,
salary is $250,000.
hit us
I'm
up.
ready to start immediately.
Yeah, yeah, I'm into it. I'm into it. So there are, a few other quotes. Rock Paper Shotgun also spoke with another lawyer, Tim Cotton, who's the senior legal counsel at RELX, who is the owner of the Gamer Network and Rock Paper Shotgun. So I guess he's from their parent company. And he's a specialist in media law with over 22 years of experience. And he had a couple things to say. He and I think this is good because this will give some of the definitions that you were talking about. Under UK and EU law, copyright law is automatically applied to an original artwork when it's created, forbidding others from copying or reproducing that artwork in any way. And then there's the minor exceptions that that we're aware of, right? That work the same way in almost every country when it comes to parody or other fair use applications such as education or commentary or any of that sort of thing, right?
Mm. Or it goes into public domain, like Steamboat Willie did this year.
Correct. And like the example he gives is, for example, you might teach a course on how Pokemon are designed using otherwise copyrighted illustrations, and that would be legal. And then creators can also take out trademarks on characters so as to stop others from copying them. So that's where you get into the trademarking of like qualities of a character, right? So, for example, if you are familiar at all with the superhero Captain Marvel, who's now more popularly known as Shazam, he was a character that originated as like a Superman copy, right? And had
I genuinely, right? I had no idea they were the same character.
yeah, it's a whole thing. It's
Shazam!
a really
Shaz
interesting story. It's a really interesting story. And you want to talk about like the
What's his special
legal.
power? He can, like, hear music and he knows instantly what it is. He's like, "Shazam, that song's this."
It's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. All right, I don't have time I can't summarize it for you. It's insane. But that ended up not working out, right? Like DC sued over it and long story short, they ended up losing the case because like you can't um copyright the broad enough concept, right, of superheroes or whatever, right, of Superman and those things that was not distinct enough. But you'll see trademarks on a lot of elements of specific characters. Like, I've seen it on like certain Dragon Ball Z characters in their video games and things like that. And it's like I guess that's how you are able to kind of like dial into, you know, um, like what are the specific elements of your character's design that make it unique and not allow people to copy that, which seems way harder to prove, but that seems to be the understanding. And it says here, right? You can take out trademarks to stop others from copying them, though under the principle of quote unquote passing off. You can also bring a case against somebody for making use of your design, even if you haven't trademarked it. So that's, I guess, the other thing is that, like, if somebody is intentionally copying your work and you don't have a trademark, but like it's done in a way that is obviously blatant, it seems like you can also go after them if there's, I guess, a risk of creating brand confusion or something like that, which is interesting.
Yeah, I remember Apple did this against Samsung, right? And
Yeah.
they won that lawsuit because Samsung was basically copying the iPhone's software and design of the hardware and everything.
So The question here was, do any of these prohibitions apply to Palworld? Cotton doesn't think so, commenting that Pokemon and Pals are, quote, sufficiently different that there's no problem. The key point is that however closely Palworld's monster designs may ape Pokemon, Cotton still feels it's obvious that each game is the work of a different organization. Quote, I don't think there's any confusion. As an observer, the average person on the street, I don't think people are going to be confused as to who it belongs to.
And I would agree with that for starters. I can't play Pokemon on my Xbox, but I can play Palworld there.
True. And then let me see. He pointed to smaller differences between the monster designs that might undermine a claim of copyright infringement. Like Lamball might be a rotund cartoon sheep akin to Pokemon's Wooloo, but it has a different profile with different shaped eyes and limbs. Palworld's Verdash looks a bit like the Pokemon Cinderace, but it has a different color scheme with red instead of green trousers. It gives a couple more examples of that. And then he said, someone's been very careful, I think, to make sure that it doesn't appear to be the same. We often I'm sorry, and then he drew parallels with his work on merchandising operations for Reed Pop events. We often, with our merchandise, have to be careful about what we put on it for Gamer Network or EGX so that the merchandise isn't the same. I've advised with things like, give him one ear rather than two ears, or put them on four legs rather than two. So that's where you get into the like small iteration can really go a long way, right? And to your point, right? If I draw a character that looks kind of like Mickey Mouse, you can't sue me just because he kind of looks like Mickey Mouse unless I'm kind of intentionally trying to make you think that he's Mickey Mouse, right?
Yeah,
Like
I called him
that's
Schmicky Schmouse, and I'm, putting it in the cinemas at the exact same time, or putting it on the shelf next to the Disney toys.
or like he's wearing, the exact like he's got red pants with yellow buttons on them. It's like,
Mhm.
okay, like clearly you're trying to create association between this established thing and your new thing. And that's I guess where it gets muddy. Um so the only thing he said, anybody can sue anybody for any oh, I'm sorry, this was a different lawyer. Richard Hogue of Hogue Law tweeted about this. He said, anybody can sue anybody for any reason, so I can't tell you what Nintendo will or won't do about Palworld. I can tell you, however, that they'd have a tough time winning on any infringement claim that isn't arguing a direct design copy. So I think that's where this 3D model thing comes in, right? Like the comment from
Mm.
VGC, the smoking gun of it all is if these videos prove what they say that they prove, that could be the thing that actually makes the difference, right? If Nintendo is able to prove that to make these models, that's the Pocket World, right? No, it's Pocket something else. It's Pal. I'll
Pocket
say
Pair.
Pocket. If their team, right, the Pocket Pair team, did dump these models in and then make adjustments, right, to create their models, that's where I think that's where the Pokemon Company and Nintendo have them. If they can prove that, and these videos, they seem to prove that, but that's neither here nor there, right? That's up to like you said,
It, and it's
that's up
also
for the courts
one
to decide.
It's also one anonymous person on X showing a couple of videos. Some
Mhm.
people have even disputed some of the videos that this person's posted, saying it's clear that you scaled down the model to make it fit. Yet you said it was an exact model. They've then apologized about that one. There's been like back and forth about some of the claims that that person's made. Obviously, I would imagine the Pokemon company's got a copy of Palworld in their office open, and they're inspecting the models themselves to
Yeah.
see. But I don't know if you can kind of put the genie back in the bottle on this one. Like, can you take down a game that sold 2 million copies and
I mean, you
force them to
can.
like get rid of it, or do you just say you can't use these models? You've got to make your own from scratch, and is
I mean,
that
that
enough?
could happen, but I mean, I guess it's like what happens in the interim, right? Because it's like you said, they're a small team. Yeah, they made $189 million or whatever. But if this happens and they have to take the game off Steam, are they going to be forced to issue refunds to people? If they are, then how much money do they have left to develop original assets for 100 characters after the fact? Is this a thing
Mm.
that maybe they can skirt the law here for a certain amount of time and then they can as they are, it's only on early access, right? They could always change the models, they could always update animations and everything. But like, I don't know how that works when you have a product that you made money on, right? Because it's like You would think that all the money that's been made in those 5 days, right, and all the money that they're making right now, if it is with these plagiarized assets in place, then, they're gonna owe those profits or some.
That's where you kind of settle it in court, I think, or settle out of court, where you argue it and you say, well, was the reason we made $189 million because of these stolen assets, or was it because we made a great game that people really loved, and us swapping out the assets, people are still playing it and they don't care?
Yeah, but I think that that is a much harder argument to make when a core part of your product's identity is capitalizing off of this other product that you have been accused and then proven to have stolen from, right? Like, Palworld would not be successful if not for its association to Pokemon. I think we can both agree on that. I don't know that the Pokemon models being in the game matter at all, but it was a shortcut that allowed them to put the game out earlier and save money, and that you can prove, right? That, like, they broke the law in an effort to, you know, make more money, and that is illegal.
Mm.
And, like, they will be held accountable for that if they're found to be guilty. And, maybe it isn't a thing where they can settle out or whatever, but it's like, how much money do they have to play with, right? Nintendo has a lot of money. Nintendo could go to court over this for a long time if they want to. Hell, they might not even need to be right. They could take them to court and just run them out of business because they don't have enough money to fight the
I
battle.
guess it's not Nintendo in this instance, right? It's Pokemon Company that would own the copyright and on these assets
So,
themselves.
Pokemon Company would own the copyright. The thing that's interesting is you mentioned this earlier and we didn't get to
I
it
guess
yet.
it's Game Freak, isn't it? Because it's a stolen asset from Game Freak. That like the asset itself, the 3D model, was created for that specific game.
Like, hold on. I don't know if Game Freak is owned by the Pokemon Company or not. That's an
No,
interesting
they're
point.
not because they like make other shit. They're making that game for PlayStation, aren't they?
The company is jointly owned by Nintendo, Game Freak, and Creatures.
Yeah. So
Oh,
yeah,
that's the Pokemon
that's
Company.
Pokemon. Yeah, yeah. What do
Okay.
creatures do these days? Sod all.
I mean, they make Pokemon games. Yeah, that's it,
They
right?
what like yeah like what Pokemon game have they made? Like
They made
recently?
weren't they the I think they were the lead developer on Let's Go or one of them, right? Like, maybe I'm
Maybe.
wrong.
Yeah.
Huh. No, it's been a minute. Yeah, they mostly did spin-offs. Um, so yeah, so I guess, right? But it's like they had the issue with there was a skin, right? A mod that somebody put out that was a Pokemon skin that went over
Yeah, yeah.
everything, and that got DMCA'd by Nintendo. So,
I mean, of course it
I don't
did.
know.
Like, but that's part of the course on anything. Like
Right, right. Yeah.
That Legend of Zelda remake that a fan had remade, Link's Awakening, the Game Boy Color
Oh,
version,
no,
and
yeah,
that
yeah. No,
got
I just mean, like,
taken
for
down.
Pokemon, right? Because 'Cause you're saying, like, who's the one that does the suing there? Is it
Oh yeah,
Nintendo? Is
yeah.
it it's like I guess it's technically the Pokemon Company overall, but I guess it's, like, because it's video game assets, that might actually be Nintendo's jurisdiction.
Nintendo that does it.
I'm not quite sure how
Mhm.
that breaks down. I've never quite understood, like, where that comes into play, but either way, it's definitely interesting because, like, they're a famously litigious company, right? So it's like the idea that they would go after this is not at all hard to imagine.
No,
Um, I think I guess it's a question of, like, how much do they care? Because, like, it being such a big win, like, such a big game, like, I think is something that I could see incentivizing them to take more action than they might have otherwise. Because, like, you know, all of the headlines about Pokemon right now are about a game that's not Pokemon, and, like, that they can't be happy about that, right? And so, like, the idea that
I mean, maybe they should have put a Pokemon game out last year then. Like, is that
it's so
partially
hard.
on them?
It's so hard though, because it's like it wouldn't have mattered, right? Because that's not this game. Like, they would need to put out something in this
Mm.
genre to, you
I
know.
mean, and maybe they need to be kind of looking at this and kind of taking point and going, okay, we've been kind of making the same game over and over and over again, and we've freshened it up with Legends, and people really liked that. But then we went back to the kind of same thing again, and people weren't maybe as kind of excited by that. this is a
Yeah.
totally fresh take on it, and I do kind of think that maybe it will inspire them to kind of branch out and do something a little bit different. But maybe that's just wishful thinking on my side because I don't know that Game Freak really kind of has it in them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, right? Like, I think it's an interesting thing where, like, I could kind of see it going either way, where like maybe they do look at this and like, holy shit, there's money on the table for us to be doing stuff in other genres. We need to branch out a little bit. I could see that being the case, but it's also like, who knows, right? The Pokemon company is so like resistant to change or rock the boat, and it's like the most profitable IP in the world. So like that makes sense when you really get down to it. So,
Hmm.
you know, I would never hold my breath waiting for the Pokemon Company to change, but you never know. Like they did do Arceus, they did put out Pokemon Concierge, which was a different thing. Like they did finally end the Ash storyline and introduce new characters. Like maybe they are ready for a shakeup, and maybe this is the kind of thing that feels like a shot in the arm, where it's like, hey, like we almost let somebody eat our lunch. Like we gotta shake things up. But who knows? I guess the really interesting question is going to just be what happens in the next couple of weeks. Like, do they take any kind of legal action? And if they do, is it because they think they can win the case, or it's because they think they can bleed this way smaller company dry? Because that's totally valid,
Or I think what would have been more likely by now is they fire over a DMCA to Valve. Valve has in the past shown that they are really, really happy to kind of keep Nintendo on their side, probably because they want to avoid lawsuits from an extremely litigious company. But they didn't allow Dolphin on the store
right?
because of that potential with the key in there. And they've just blocked Portal 64 from continuing. I don't know if you saw that
I
one where
didn't. That
someone
sucks.
was someone was remaking Portal for the N64. They had a meeting with Valve. They said, "Yeah, we're using the SDK like that was leaked." And Valve was like, "Okay, we're going to shut the project down. Then I'm afraid you can't do it because you just told us that you're using Nintendo's IP."
Yeah, yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head, man. So I'm very interested to hear what the community thinks. I know some of you are playing the game and enjoying it. I know some of you are out on it for all the reasons that we just talked about. I'm very interested to see, like, from the people who are playing it, what is it about it that you're liking, and is this something that you want to see the Pokemon Company try to do, or is it more just like this style of game speaks to you, and I'm interested to hear what people are connecting with about it. And for the folks that aren't playing it, would you play it if it had original assets, or is this just not a kind of game that speaks to you anyway? I'd love
Hmm.
to know. I'd love to hear from you. So make sure you write in all the ways that we talked about above. Hit us up. Flipscreen.games is the website. You can get in touch in a number of ways. Join the Discord and keep the conversation rolling between episodes. Write into the show via email. However you choose to get involved, show your support or write into the show. We thank you for tuning in to another episode of Nintendo Noise. For the crew, I've been Pete. He's been Steve. We'll see you next week.